All right. Hello, Norm. Um, so welcome to this first ever episode of I don't know what this thing will be. And so for the audience, the listeners, so our guest is Norman Chella. I know Norm from the Rome community. He runs Rome FM, and I asked him prior to this recording, you know, how he would be we would like to be introduced, and he told me something two very interesting things, like two identities he has been exploring in the past months or years. One is a polymath in progress, and the other one is a mad scientist. So we were already talking about these things before the recording. I told him, hey, Norm, please save it for the podcast. So Norm, maybe that's a prompt to start this podcast, like to introduce yourselves. What do you mean by polymath in progress, and what do you mean by mad scientist, and why do you identify with these words, identities?
Wow. Prepare for a very long answer because those two titles have been stuck with me for a long time. The first one has been for a number of years already. Coming from a background where researching something for the sake of curiosity or finding answers to questions or closing thoughts or ponderings that I've had made me explore different directions in every field and every movement, hobby, form of writing, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or even martial arts or whatever it is. I've started to realize that all of these experiences are pretty much synonymous with my identity, but I couldn't really find a way to articulate that identity. But throughout, say, reading about other famous figures or scientists, actors, whatever it is, there's always this one word that came up, and that was a polymath. Right now, it's a buzzword in like the startup community, where you're like, oh, you're interested in 2 to 3 things. Oh, you're a polymath. I hate that part, but like if we backtrack a little bit before that, my search for a place for polymathy began in a place where I realized how multifaceted I am. One day I would be thinking about fiction, and then the other day I would be thinking about, research and biotech. And then the next day after, I'd be thinking about capoeira, right? How do I do like a crescent wheel kick from a handstand? And then the day after, I'd be thinking about like hip hop, like rap, like the history of rap or something like that. Like, you cannot contain me, right? Like my thoughts cannot be molded into one shape, one size, one whatever it is, right? So with that being said, the word polymath kept coming up, right? So we have names like Stephen Fry, like Donald Glover, Maya Angelou, even going all the way back to Renaissance era, Leonardo da Vinci. But then we even have other thinkers, philosophers, etc. So this became something that the most obsessed people would resonate with, this word. But I hated that part about like everyone calling themselves a polymath just because they like 2 to 3 things. Mm-hmm. No, it's not polymathy. It's not cheap. Okay. Right. I'm very protective of this word. It's not cheap. You earn that name. You earn that title. Here's Khalil, here's the thing, right? Okay. If I sing in the shower, can I call myself a singer? No, right? You just sing for fun, right? You don't earn the title singer just because you do something for a little bit, right? Polymathy is a difficult, endearing, what's the word for it? Humbling and tough journey, right? Your obsession makes up and uses most of your time. So polymathy is it's not a title. It's a state of mind. It is a state of mind you try to default to, right? If you have the roller coaster ride of life, it will try to default to that straight line, and that is polymathy, because you have a spectrum of interest across many things, right? So you try to flatten that out, right? And that average of everything is you. So I made this title polymath in progress because I aspire to be as polymathic as these amazing figures, but I'm in the progress of understanding the extent of my constraints, the shape of my identity, where the shape is not static, it's organic, it's contextual, right? And therein, that results in this title, like the polymath in progress. The progress part is more important than the polymath part. Definitely, right? So that's already one answer. This is gonna be a long one, guys. I'm really sorry. So that's part one. Part two is the mad scientist. This was to express the obsession part, almost unhealthy, heavily connected to Rome, heavily connected to note-taking, heavily connected to answering questions, etc. The mad scientist to me is a word, a name that fits and has negative connotations. It fits the most obsessed of people. So like the most obsessed, even at the compromise of their health, even at the compromise of their mentality, even at the compromise of the people around them. This title came up to me recently. Let's just say, like a few months before I discovered Rome, which we can probably talk about that, where I just like writing everything down. I don't know why. I just did. I just liked finding conclusions. I just liked hypotheses, right? My conversations, the topics that I had in my head could not resonate with the people around me. I was isolating myself in my own pursuit for answers because I wanted to know them more so than I wanted to know the geographics, right? The people around me, the locations, right? By societal expectations, I am mad. If you put it that way, right? I choose not to default to normalcy. It is a decision I've made, right? I choose to be crazy about everything. And this sounds like bull crap, right? It sounds like, but the reason why this really resonates with me is because I have, done things that have sacrificed my relationships with people just because I wanted to know more answers, and I ended up paying attention to that more so than them. So I have lost friends because of my pursuit for knowledge. Like that's already one example, right? The mad part about it was to highlight the compromise, but the scientist part about it was to highlight the logical element of this, because the mad part can actually describe the emotional journey of the pursuit of knowledge. But the scientist is more on logical, it's more on grounded realities, it's more on the resources where, like the sources where you get your information, right? Like academia, conversations with other scientists, professors, etc., or even, podcast guests, right? Like podcast guests who have such a great understanding of everything. Podcast guests are literal walking textbooks, right? You get them on your show, and then all of a sudden, 1 hour of them giving you a lecture, a master class on whatever the hell topic you want, right? Like, this is like, I'm literally cheating by having a podcast, like getting people to talk about like that experience.
Yeah, this is why I wanted
but,
to get you here.
Yeah.
To also cheat.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, it's cheating, right? Like guesting on a show, whether it's a podcast or a video interview, it's cheating. It's dirty tactics. Like, you want to learn the world? Outsource your brain to many people.
Yeah, you're
right?
getting like the greatest hits of your whoever you're interviewing.
Exactly, right? And even if you cannot get them as a guest, you can read their writing, you can read their book, you can listen to them as a guest on other shows, you can find their YouTube channel, right? It's cheating. Like it I don't know why the secret is like there, and I'm just taking advantage of it. It's crazy. But yeah, that's just an example, right, of the mad scientist mindset, is that it's almost unhealthy cheating in the realm of knowledge because I want to build a textbook of the world within me through the experiences of other people. They are filters, right? They've been through thick and thin. I respect their experiences. I know that they've gone through similar struggles. And I'm like, hey, I appreciate what you've gone through. Can you share some of that with me? Right? Like, old friend. uh, and that's how it came to be. These two phrases, these two identities, they do not make up the entirety of my life, but they make up the foundation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the next thing I would want to ask you is actually like how you ended up like this. I mean, there's so much energy to explore, to be curious. But maybe first, I guess it's good to like put a map of where we could go here. Because like if you go to your website, that's the norm.com, you could see there the proof of work of your pursuit of being a polymath in progress. Like you have there your writing about your podcasting, and you also have your own podcast, several podcasts. You talk about your voice work. You talk about, I guess, accelerated learning through like SuperLearner, public speaking, writing, and of course, well, which is I didn't see it in the website itself, but I mean, listening to Rome FM and following you on Twitter, I mean, you're also very much into, knowledge management, Rome, tools for thought, all these things. So I guess maybe a good way to, I guess, make sense of this map is to ask your origin story. Like, how did you end up in Rome, the Rome community? How did you end up in podcasting? So what's your origin story?
Oh boy. We're gonna have to go back a couple of decades. So I grew up in a household where there's a lot of books around, a lot of atlases of the world, right? Fun facts. Did you know this, right? On the animal kingdom or on even on Star Wars or whatever it is. So both nonfiction and fiction, and even video games as well. That's another medium of exploring something interesting, right? It's escapism to some, but it's exploration to other people. So to me, I've always viewed it as exploration. One of the most compelling series or books that have compelled me to want to search for more things is a series of books for young teens, like youths, called the Horrible Science series. So the Horrible Science series is it's like a, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a comic book meets science informational thing. It's like it's just like, it gives you a primer of a scientific field, but it's through jokes and comic strips, and it has actual accurate information of like various scientists, etc. But it's funny, right? It's funnily told. And I was reading this at like 11 years old. I still have my collection. I have like 14 books downstairs. I'm born Malaysian. I moved to Europe at like age 10 or 11, and so I started collecting these books when I was in Europe. I was in the Netherlands, so we carried these books all the way back home, and those books were examples of me just finding learning fun. So if school is an institution or a location where you go there to get results, then books is a place or a location where you learn to enjoy, right? You learn for eustress, you learn for entertainment, you learn for fun. And I kept that as a habit. I guess I kept that as a habit. And the best part is it's like cuisine, right? You have a favorite cuisine and you go to this restaurant for this kind of cuisine, you go to this other restaurant for this kind of cuisine. There's a variety of foods. You want to try all of them. It's the same here. I'm like a knowledge gourmet. Is there a word for it? Like what do you call that? Like someone who's like a foodie, right? But then it's like for insight, right? So like I'm an insight gourmet. I guess that what you can call that. So one day I'll be thinking about this field from this horrible science comic book, and then another day I'll be reading this other series from this book. So that willingness to jump from field to field was just something I instilled within myself from a very young age, and that expanded out to everything else that's not science. So, fast forward a few years later and started working. I joined a Japanese fintech company as head of marketing, and on the side, I was writing fiction, because obviously, right, polymath in progress, you're going to be doing whatever the hell you want. So I was writing short stories and fiction on Quora, and on Quora, I guess I got a little famous, or got a following from writing all these short stories on various things. And one of the podcasts that I started listening to compelled me to want to write a short story, but narrated, because I love the concept of having this campfire, and then there's someone narrating a book, like a children's story, and then making the characters and expressing all that. So I was thinking about a way to do that at the time. And while I was working and while I was writing those stories, there was a short story competition that came up, and I was like, oh, I should, at the same time, I want to, practice my craft. And I wrote a short story, and then I was like, and I backed out. I didn't post the competition. I was like quite sad about that. But I bought a mic. Actually, it's this Blue Yeti mic right here. I'm not using it at the moment, but I bought that mic and I brought it to the office early in the morning, like 6 a.m. And then I just started recording it, because I didn't want to betray my story. So I recorded it and I added music, sound backing, etc., which was inspired by that podcast. And that ended up becoming the very first episode I've ever published of a podcast. And that set me down this rabbit hole of not just the medium of podcasting, but articulation, right? The different mediums, the written word in fiction, the written word in nonfiction, podcasting fiction, podcasting nonfiction. So that one podcast became 2, became 3, became 4, 5, 6, and I have like 6 shows out with like 7. That led me to help with like setting up the first Asia's podcast, shall we say, like virtual event. And so we got a lot of like support from all other places like Google and all that. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So I was setting myself apart as someone who was involved in podcasting, even though I was just some dude who bought a Blue Yeti and then just recorded it in the office. And I was just like narrating weird characters while there's like people from other companies next door who could listen to me because the walls were thin. It was pretty funny. But it resulted in this search for articulation. What is the best way to express X, right? X being a thought, a statement, etc. If you and I were to explore one same concept, we would write in different ways, we would draw it in different ways, and we would talk about it in different ways. And your mental models would be different, my frameworks would be different, your memories would be different, and therefore will lead you to conclude elsewhere, and mine would be the same, like mine would be a different direction. Articulation ended up becoming the sole purpose for me. It was just like, how can I express this in this way? So you'll see my proof of work on that website. It's writing, it's podcasting, it's even videos, etc. I mean, I was thinking about a YouTube channel, and I have some videos here, but can't help it. And in the middle of while I was working that job, I really wanted to make more time to do these kinds of things. So I wanted to be more efficient. So I started taking up the SuperLearner Masterclass, which is, as you mentioned, it's accelerated learning. So these are in the fields of speed reading, building memory palaces, creating markers that can help me with remembering everything in my life. How can I remember the entire Horrible Science comic book series in my head? Right? Like that's a goal I've always wanted to do. So like, these books that have been with me for like nearly 20 years by this point, like I really want to like remember them. I really want to read through them and then remember them. That became a foundational aspect of me wanting to, research everything. So on your question on Rome. So I I became freelance completely, and I dove into podcasting full time. And I was connected with another podcaster, and on Twitter he liked this link from Nat Eliason about Rome, and I was just like, oh, okay, it's just a writing app, whatever. And then I clicked on it, and then he showed the video. It's like a 20-minute video or something like that. And then I found out that you can reuse. I mean, I didn't know the word transclusion at this time, but you can reuse sentences that you used before in this in within the same page. And I was just like, wait a minute, so I don't have to copy paste everything. And then it syncs, so it's like, wait a minute, this sentence is viewed on every single page. So that blew my mind, because the UX, the possibilities or the implications was insane. It completely destroyed everything I thought about articulation. I've always thought about articulation as linear because we only have one screen. Now it's not just one screen, it's one screen front end, and then the back end is so many different transclusions, references, and everything. And then I got obsessed with it, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I was using Rome, and I wanted to learn more about it, right? Because mad scientist, right? Polymath in progress. The only way I could learn about that was by cheating. So I wanted to talk to people. So I built Rome FM. Like, see, it's all connected, right? All my answers in this call are transcluded, right? They're all linked together. You can actually visualize it. I can actually imagine the transclusion in front of me. Like, if I dove into Rome because I want to learn how to think better, write better, whatever it is. I want to learn how to use it better. I want it to be more efficient. I cheat by talking to people, and then it doesn't count as cheating anymore because I turn it into a show because it's published for other people to learn as well. And then next thing you know, Rome FM ends up becoming, I don't want to say a cornerstone, but it ends up becoming another character in my time online to be part of like the knowledge management space. So yeah, that's pretty much where I am right now, right? Like I have my podcast persona, which is on my main, and then next thing you know, on Rome FM, I'm just weird guy with an astrolabe for a profile picture, and I'm obsessing over random knowledge graphs and jump navigation because I'm like jump navigation's #1 fan, and I don't care because it's fun. But on the flip side, the uses of a knowledge graph and the uses of Rome Research and many other PKM apps which I'm trying now, blew up. And that is my experiences in doing so. That exploration it feeds back to my time on Earth and my time in exploring these things. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, whatever it was.
Yeah. Now I'm curious. So now you have given your origin story, and you have told us like about accelerated learning and doing so many things. You're so productive. So what's your playbook right now? Like what's your, how do you operate? How do you execute your ideas?
How do I,
like, what's your schedule? Like, how do you organize your day?
Oh man, that's difficult. So it has changed over time. I really enjoy the quiet of the morning, which is what I call it, when the world is asleep. So years ago, it used to be 5 a.m. wake ups just to write. So 5 a.m. push-ups, and then I'll be in front of my table with pen and paper, and then freeform write, and then 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. I start writing, whatever it is, right? Maybe it's something I scheduled before, where it's like a blog post, or if I just want to explore an idea in my head. Now with Rome, it's a little bit different. I can embody myself into that context, that quiet of the morning, as soon as I'm on Rome Research. And the way that I do that is, via what I call the thought mind system, where it's just, some basic principles of tagging certain thoughts. And then those tags are not to tag the topic of the block or the idea, but the checkpoint, right? The checkpoint and the progress of that idea. Because inherently, all pages are just forms of navigation. They're not meant to help you compile everything. They're just meant to help you navigate easier. So when I wanted to emulate that for just tagging, not pure pages, I just used less pages, which is all great. So before it was 5 a.m. wake ups, and then I write all the way until 9 a.m., 10 a.m., have breakfast, and then I start actual work, full-time stuff. And then at night, I would read, but then sometimes I would have to stay up late for calls or interviews, because the only, to be honest, the only enemy of society is distance, right? Like if we had no time zones, like if everyone was on the same time zone, like I think we would be way more productive as a species. But that's a whole other thing I can rant about. Anyway, so yeah, my work and my rest is synonymous with each other, which means that each day isn't really consistent. Most of the days it is like 5 a.m. and then all the way until evening I rest, and then I sometimes stay up at night. Nowadays I stopped doing that. Nowadays it's a natural wake up without an alarm around 8. I would write immediately into Rome up until like 11, and then I'll stop work and until like 5, and then from 5 I rest until 8, and then 8 I am like, I want to work, but I don't want to work too hard. So I noticed that because it is synonymous, that is my emotional desire for learning / working for fun, that desire that is trying to be met. So I park like my reading times, my freeform writing times from 8 to like 11, and then I go to sleep. Sometimes it's not until 11, sometimes it's like until 2, but that's because when the muse catches you, you have to obsess over it, right? So if you are under the principles of the mad scientist, you don't have a schedule at that time. Time does not matter. The schedule is only a default, right? The schedule is only a default system for you to fall on to, so that you can make the most out of average days, right? If you have an average day, the first thing you seek solace in is your schedule, your calendar, your task list, your checklist. That's why we have these times where you're like, oh, how do I prepare for the next day? Because that's your system is a default, right? Your system is the floor, but we want to jump high into the sky like nearly every single time. And sometimes if you don't enough times, you'll feel sad about certain days where you're not as energetic, you're not as happy, right? You can get burned out, right? Which is what I've been having recently, where you don't seem so creative. Your words seem like crap. You write in your blocks and you're like, these blocks, I could just delete them and they will make a difference in my graph. You have bad days. So the schedule there is a default. So I have that schedule as a default, but when it's time to forge a thought, I break that schedule completely. And sometimes it's at the cost of like, work or whatever it is, which is good and bad. To be honest, there's nothing good about it. Like, this is just me, maybe just not respecting my own boundaries, but it's good in that it quenches the need to conclude something, an idea, a concept, a statement. And I think that's a way to just articulate my personality. And that is that I want to end things while that moment is still there, right? Since time is fleeting and that we have an inherent relationship with our memory, I want to make sure that that memory is well respected. So if I have an idea, I will drop everything and I'll just immediately go to the keyboard and start like writing it out, or even like drawing it out on my notebook or whatever it is. So yeah, the system for schedules, but then also the flexibility for serendipity.
Yeah, you mentioned that when a muse visits, you have to take advantage of that. You have to seize that moment, because when it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
Could you describe how it feels to be visited by a muse?
Can I? Can I? Sure. So to understand my answer, we have a prerequisite that to be met. So this is a mental model I have not shared with anyone yet. So you might as well. It's cheating, right? Now you're the first person to hear it. So I've been trying to model life on a graph, which sounds insane. It sounds stupid, right? It sounds like you're like, what the hell are you talking about, right? I've been trying to visualize life on the graph because it's been a question that's been on my mind, and I was like, I don't know why am I thinking about this, right? But then I came to the conclusion that it's like I think if I get it right, it's like a sine wave. I think that's the right shape of it, a sine wave, or a sin wave, whatever it is, where life is an oscillation and normalcy is when x equals 0. So when sine is, way more than 0, you have a positive day. And then when you have sine is less than 0, then you have a negative day. And your goal is to default to normalcy because that's when you can cope with life, right? So you have that. I didn't believe my own thought at the time. I was just like, it makes sense, but I choose not to believe it, and I don't know why. So I wrote it on like a note, a post-it note. I put it on the wall, and I just left it there for like 2 months. And I went back to that post-it note, and I looked at it and like, oh, okay, it makes sense, because after 2 months, I had that thought in my head, and I was tracking days where I was less than the x-axis and more than the x-axis. And then on an average normal day where nothing bad happened, nothing good happened, and I was just by myself, I looked at the post-it note. I'm like, oh, okay, now this model is valid. This post-it note it has a seat in my head. It should belong. And one of the things that helped me understand that is that it is the material attribute of that line, of that graph. So now we're not thinking about the graph as like, as just like a paper, and then you have your pen and you just draw it out. No. Now we're thinking about what is the material of the graph. Is it metal? Is it rigid, right? Is it paper? Is it fragile? And I came to the conclusion that your graph line of life is a form of rubber, because rubber absorbs tension, and tension is merely a form of stored energy, right? If you have stored energy and you don't use it, you bottle it up, it's unhealthy for you. You don't know what to do about it, right? You're tense, you're shaking, right? You don't know what to do, right? Fear, worry, doubt is when you are obsessing over a past memory or a past experience, and your body is embodying it, is expressing it, right? Your body is showcasing or storing tension underneath the x-axis. So when I thought about it that way, I was like, okay, this model makes sense if you put a material attribute to it, right? If it's like, if my graph line is steel or titanium, you can't shape that, right? You can't move that. You're going to be stuck, and that's like the worst material. So I'm like, okay, rubber makes more sense. So life is merely a form of tension. All of life is merely a form of tension. And yes, okay, so life is merely a form of tension. I nearly forgot the question, which is what do you feel like when a muse captures you? Okay, so when a muse captures you, let's look at it from this analogy. When a muse captures you, it is sudden tension. It is a spike in tension. It is when the graph is suddenly, it spikes up. And the reason why is because, and I think for everyone else who is a thinker, someone interested in knowledge management, or someone who's obsessed with research or ideas or whatever it is, or a concept, when a muse grabs you, it's like drinking coffee. All of a sudden you have energy, right? All of a sudden you're like, oh, what about this thought, right? What about, you just start typing, you start obsessing, right? All of a sudden the coloration of the world around you pops out, right? It's because on an average day, your senses, your eyes, your nose, mouth, ears, are muted, you're not prepared for a greater expansion of the intake of receiving information, of insight. A bit like, oh, it's a bit like that dumb phrase where it's like you can stop and smell the flowers and all of that, right? That's just a way for you to default to expanded awareness, or like Alexander technique or whatever it is, where you really notice the greens of the grass and the beautiful colors of a flower, etc. This is the same thing. Tension is merely seeing the colors pop in your ideas. When a muse captures you with a thought, the first thing you do is that you want to describe it. No exceptions. The first thing you want to do is you want to describe it, right? Even before, what do I want to do next? What am I thinking about? No. The first thing you want to do is articulation. Hands down. Step one. Everyone will agree with me. If you want to disagree with me, you can fight me in the comments. I don't care. I am not backing off from this, right? The first thing you want to do is you want to articulate it. So if a muse is this like beautiful woman that captures your attention, the first thing you want to do is you want to describe how beautiful that woman is. That is how I feel whenever I capture, like I have a muse in my head. And with that being said, you will do nothing more than humble yourself down before the act of wanting to express that. And then that's when you're like, okay, let's start, right? And yeah, that's pretty much a rundown of how a muse captures me.
Have you thought about like how to increase the occasions of encountering a muse? Like how do you manipulate the rubber band so that, I guess there's more sudden tension, there's more sudden energy when you encounter that muse? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, but it's not tested. So I'm not sure if my answer will be the same now as of this recording, but I'll give you my thoughts on that. So the answer to, the pillar or the foundation to the eventual answer to this is environmental design. I cannot force muses to be attracted to me. That's like pulling someone's head and then like forcing them to look at it. No, I cannot. But if we're looking at it from the analogy of tension and the graph, I can design the environment around me to reduce not only the amount of negative tension, but also the percentage of receiving negative tension. So if we look at it from the sine graph, assuming that the sine graph is like, equal positive and negative, because it has to be, because that's how you get the average like normalcy line, right? The negative one, you want to try to minimize that as much as possible, right? Distractions, right? Blocking people in social media, or taking away unhealthy foods, or getting fresh air, or habits like taking a walk, right? Or being away from the screen, or reading a book instead of like watching YouTube for like 9 hours, which is still something that I do. So that's obviously a giant negative tension that I should address, right? And environmental design then becomes very important, mainly on the basis that the act or the moment when a muse captures you is natural, and you should not force it. It's like a force of the universe that you cannot hold on to. It must only come to you. But what you can do is, one, minimize the negative connotations of your environment through environmental design, and two, increase the surface area or the number of directions whereby a muse can come towards you. This is a bit like, if you want to find a partner, you want to go on many different dating profiles at the same time. It's like that, right? Except that the way that you do this is via incremental thinking. It's not a phrase that I haven't explored yet, so I can't really say it's can be the same phrase now or in the future. But this is the act of exploring atomic ideas or exploring concepts, etc., but then having it out there for the world to see, that increases the surface area of you as a person, as an individual, in relation to the world. When we're thinking about stuff like, publishing blog posts or releasing a podcast episode, your entire your audience is the world. Your resident audience, which is, in a nutshell, a resident audience is the audience that is most loyal to your insights, regardless of medium. Well, I can totally talk about that another time, but they will be most likely the ones that are most resonant with your ideas, which means that these people are the ones that are most likely to be gateways to muses who will attract you or be attracted to you. So if, like, I feel you are part of my resident audience. So if I write something and you read it and you're like, wow, this is cool. And maybe you reach out to me and say, hey, that was a great blog post, or, whatever it is. This reminded me of this article that I read, right? Maybe you can explore that. And then I would read that. And through reading that, I gain a muse, or an idea captures my attention, right? It's just attention capture. But you needed to be there for that muse to be achieved, or in order to reach that muse, you must be there, right? You have to be there to have read my stuff in order for me to reach that muse. So with that being said, increase the surface area through, your proof of work, your body of work, for maximum positive tension, so that your line graph would be a series of plus ones as much as possible. It doesn't even have to be plus one. Maybe it's just like plus 0.1. Maybe it's just a small idea. Maybe it's just a fun thought. That's okay. Because your end goal is to try and increase the average of your line to be above 0 by minimizing negative tension and maximizing positive tension through proximity, through body of work. Eventually, muses coming to you will be natural. Like the frequency of it will be natural. You have designed your environment to attract beautiful ideas, beautiful concepts, because you actually make the work to reach up to that point. It's a bit like in immediate, I don't know why the first image that came to my mind, it's like building a lighthouse at a coast. So a really tall lighthouse will do way better to attract ships than a shorter lighthouse, because it would affect a longer, like a further distance, like a further proximity. But yeah, that's how I would try to answer that question. And of course, this answer is pending. It's not finished yet.
Cool. And then so this is like maximizing the positive side of the graph. How about like minimizing the, so you mentioned earlier that you're currently in a state of burnout or something like that. So have you experienced this before, and how did you cope with this in the past? And what's your plan now?
Yeah, I've experienced this before. This is heavily related to one of the largest factors of the line even going below the axes in the first place, and that is fear. Every form of negative tension is a synonym of fear. Fear of forgetting something. So you obsess over note-taking and writing it down. You don't want to lose it, right? Fear of not looking good. So you try your best to be impressionable online, offline, whatever it is. You're afraid of being judged. Fear of failure. So you procrastinate to escape, right? You cope with not being able to survive if you're in a moment of facing failure at that moment in that time. It could be due to trauma. It could be due to experience. That in itself allowed your body to automatically want to protect you because you don't want to be hurt. It's fear. Fear is one of the most intricate systems of human nature. And if you don't control it, then your line graph average will be below the axis if you're always living in fear. You can think about it that way, right? Like even if you have a sine graph that's like less than the axis, then your highlight of the day will just be actually just you on a normal day. You just forgot what a normal day felt like, right? That's what it is, living in fear. To me, burnout is a form of fear. It's a form of fear of expectations, fear of betrayal. I have, clients that I'm working with, and I'm worried about failing them because there were experiences where we, back and forth conflict or whatever it is, and I don't want to go through that. I've said things to people that have hurt them, right? So I would rather cage myself up and tuck myself away instead of facing the problem or being confrontational, because I'm not really a confrontational person. I would rather talk things out in a very neutral standpoint. But then as soon as someone starts something and it's like aggressive or there's a lot of emotional investment in it, I back off, not because of not wanting to engage. I back off because of the risk factor from my contribution. I'm worried about, I find it too risky to say something because I've had experience where my most natural responses, as well as my most structured responses, both have resulted in negative experiences. So fear is based off of that. Creative burnout then is a fear of my creativity not reaching up to expectations. That's one. And if you're zooming out on that, burnout in general, at least the recent one that I've had, it's more on expectations on who I am and my responsibility, right? It's like right now I'm running an agency here in Malaysia for podcasting. And sometimes I break down on the responsibilities, even if it's a simple one. It's just like, oh, all you have to do is just like write an email to someone. And I'm like, no, what if they fail? What if they stop paying us? What if it's like, oh, what if it's a legal thing? What if we get sued? It's a lot of overthinking. It's a lot of so many imagined situations, but they're just synonyms of fear. I'm afraid of betraying them. I'm afraid of breaking expectations because I've done that before. Yes, I've done this before. Like I've had this multiple times throughout. It's sometimes it's a phase. It's just like 1 month or something like that. But actually, it's been this time it's been the longest for a while. It's actually been like this since November. We're recording in July now. So
Oh, wow.
that's pretty bad. that is pretty bad. It's what happened. It's why I've not regularly released episodes on Rome FM. It's not why I haven't, booked new guests, etc. Because this burnout had resulted in a couple of private incidents that had resulted in the betrayal of expectations. Let's just put it that way, right? And I'm afraid of that happening. So that has bled out to myself personally, like what I write about, what I talk about, whatever. And then myself professionally, which is my responsibilities as a leader, as a manager, as the middleman between, those who work and those who need help with something. And to be honest, I don't have a surefire way to deal with it, right? Like I've been trying my best to write out the pain. That's worked sometimes, but it hasn't been working that well because it's always like writing out the pain helps me bring back to, X equals 0. But then the next day I would either forget about what I just wrote and then it'll just go back down again. And yes, writing it out is cathartic, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. It is mainly a band-aid. It's not a cure. So I have a feeling that the cure to this might just be a way to deal with hesitation, like solutions to hesitation, because that is also a synonym of fear. Hesitation is just the physical expression of fear, right? That is just it, right? It's just your body is just saying, no, don't go. But it's just like that. That's just what hesitation is. Like if I could just change the definition in the dictionary, it's just a picture of me just being scared. Like that's what hesitation is. So I don't know. A solution to that would be great. Right now, to be honest, I don't know how to deal with it. I've just tried to escape, not talk to people. And that's not really healthy because that just defeats the purpose of all my intentional environmental design, because I choose to ignore all of the design and then just default to negative tension. And that, yes, that does speak to the model working, because the line graph is internal, it's not external. You're not entirely dependent on your environmental design. If I'm like completely happy, or if I'm as enlightened as a monk, I wouldn't care where I am. I will be happy with the fleeting moment right now, right? Like that's actually perfectly okay. But I'm not. So it's internal. There is a scar in me that I need to fix, and I do not know how to do that. It's expressed through hesitation. If it was bleeding, the blood would just be this color that just represents despair, if that makes sense. And I've been just trying my best to spend the days closing that wound. And that is the act of creative burnout for me. So yeah, to be honest, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer. I haven't been dealing with it that well. It doesn't mean I have not had good days, but it means that I have, as we mentioned before, the frequency of good days has decreased as a result of this happening. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Is it possible that you're just simply tired? I mean, it's just physical. I'm asking that because I've had some burnouts myself as well in the past years. And I was so surprised that maybe in the last big burnout I had, it seemed the solution was just to exercise more regularly. I mean, I started lifting then, and it has become my shield against this thing happen again. And it was just surprising for me, because I guess maybe we come from a similar background, like growing up amongst books with a family who, honors ideas and, like intellectual heroes. So my default way of solving solutions is through pure brain power. But I was just surprised, like in this last big burnout of mine, maybe it was 2017, 2018, when my business was really having difficulty. That was when I started lifting regularly, and being under the barbell just immediately removes any tension, like any worry. It's like it was just, I guess it's it's just blank. It's like zero. But then I also noticed that as my body adapted to that, it seemed like a way to also prevent burnout. So I've been hearing about this as well, like to get outside, you place yourself in the situation with your mind, but you cannot get yourself out of it with your mind as well. It's like the problem with the mind cannot be solved by the mind. It has to be something outside it. And it seems like just physical well-being, just feeling good in your body. It's like just, I don't know, it just solves a lot of it. Because I tried solving this with meaning as well. Like what I do, it's like I thought that if what I do is just meaningful to me, then I wouldn't have this this burnout. It's like it would just propel me towards that meaning. So what I found out was that isn't sufficient. It's like we're not just minds, we're also bodies, and the two are so connected. So I guess that's what that's the solution I found. And that thing hasn't happened to me for maybe 3-4 years now, since I started lifting regularly. So that's why it's like it has to be part of my week. So it can be different for different people, I imagine. It doesn't have to be lifting, but the physical, side of functioning well, of your mind functioning, I think it's just surprised me how much it has to do with being preventing burnout and being able to also say yes to inspiration because you have all this physical energy to say yes to the muse.
Yeah, you're probably right. The big change has been that I've just been very sedentary. I've not moved a lot. We have a lot of, lockdown and all that on here in Malaysia, so I can't go to the gym. I can't go to the pull-up bar. I can't do like calisthenics on the bar. And the simple alternative solution to that is just to do it at home. But I think you're probably right in that not every problem within the mind can be solved by the mind. Maybe that's just something I just haven't fully thought about enough yet. Or maybe I just accept it and be like, oh, that's cool. And then just move on to the next. And I just don't think about applying it. And the funny story that none of you brought this up. There was one of the days, maybe last month, where I saw a video of someone working out. I was just one of those days where I was just having a bad day. And so I was just on YouTube, just watching stuff all day. I just stumbled into a video of just someone working out. This was at 3 a.m. and I wanted to do push-ups immediately. It was so compelling that it made me want to do like, I think, I don't know, like 60 push-ups or something like that. I was like, wow. And I feel really good. I feel full of energy. This is 3 a.m. What the hell? Like, I'm supposed to be asleep. But for some reason, I felt so good in that time. So maybe it's that. Maybe the actual problem here, and I'm like half telling you this answer and half talking to myself at the same time because I talk to myself a lot, which is why I have this microphone here. Maybe the big problem for me that has resulted in creative burnout is, if we take the analogy of the barbell, as you mentioned, I'm holding a barbell of stored energy, but I've been trying to move that barbell with my mind, not my body. If that makes sense, right? Like, there's a lot of weight, and then I'm like, okay, what is the most logical way, or which Zettelkasten method workflow system would help me with lifting up this thought, right? Whatever the weight can be, right? It could be a worry, a fear, whatever. But then I just haven't tried. I just never squatted. I never, did whatever it is. I never did push-ups, etc. So that might be something that I have to worry about.
Just do it,
My
man. Don't worry about
design.
it.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Yeah, you're right. Yeah, just go on the floor, just start doing push-ups, etc. And I mean, you were a guest on Room FM before, and we were talking about this like near the end of the episode. And I shared about how I did capoeira. So capoeira, you need a whole space just to like do a lot of movements. I've not done capoeira for a couple of months now, which is pretty sad because you need a lot of space to like to do it, right? But there's freedom of movement and on expression and everything in there. Like capoeira is like one of the most personal things that I always like to do. I'm not that good at it, but I don't care. It's fun. And it's also physically challenging and demanding to the body. So, it satisfies that requirement. So if I have a place where I can initiate that level of fun, but still physical at the same time, I think that'd be pretty good. So I think to bring all my points together, I just haven't considered, for environmental design, I haven't considered the physical exercise aspect yet, because I've just been stuck in this room or whatever other room, part of the house. There's just a lot of stuff. There's other people, family as well. And I have not created a place or a corner of the area for myself to be physically demanding in the most compact space. And I'm like, have you noticed the way that I'm expressing this right now? Like, it's like I'm using space as an excuse, even though you and I and pretty much everyone who works out knows you don't need much space to be working out. Like, I'm using, you can tell, like, it's hesitation, right? There's hesitation in me trying to rationalize this. But that's why I'm so obsessed with that topic. So maybe it's that. Yeah, maybe I should just do it. Like, maybe just like every time I want to leave the room, I need to pay the toll, right? Pay the toll, 10 push-ups, and go leave the room, come back, pay the toll, 10 push-ups, and then I can go back and work, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, depending on your personality as well, it might help to get a coach even online. Like, I have a friend, that's his way to do it. It's like, for him to exercise, he needs to pay someone to get him accountable. So just there are existing ways to do this, or you also like. So one of the books which helped me a lot in thinking about motivation is this book called The Four Tendencies. Have you checked it out? It's essentially like people. It's like a 2x2. So
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
yeah, Gretchen Rubin. So you either respond well to external motivators or not. So, and then you either respond well to internal, not motivators, but um, internal, what's the right word? Expectations, external expectations and internal expectations. So people who respond well to external expectations should design their environment so they take advantage of that. For instance, getting a coach, announcing to the world that you're going to do this. So you'll be compelled by that external expectations. People who respond well to internal expectations, this is like creating meaning, like seeing the reasons for things. So you need to see the reasons for something for you to do that. So I found that model helpful both in managing myself and also managing other people. It's like, is this person more of an external expectations person or an internal expectations person? And I design the motivator that way. So I don't know, that might be helpful in terms of I'm thinking about that a lot right now, since I'm in my second to the last chapter of the R book I'm writing, and it's about that. It's managing a team, and the last chapter is like managing yourself. So that's going to be in the book because I found it super useful.
I have a feeling I did the test a long time ago and I just forgot what it was. But I have a feeling I resonate more towards becoming more sensitive to external expectations. Mm-hmm. That's definitely one. I'm not sure which category, but I know that when I was doing some self-introspection, one of the sources of motivation is visible impact. I don't know if there's a good word for it, but I just wrote it as visible impact, where it feels really good to me to know that whatever I did has helped somebody. So whether, when doing SuperLearner stuff, because I coach people on memory and speed reading, and the fact that this is something that I've done before, and then someone is willing to pay to ask me questions. I'm like, oh yeah, I did go through that. Like, here's what I did. And then they're like, oh, thank you so much. And then they continue. I'm like, whoa, like this feels really good. Like, beyond the career aspect of it, that is the satisfaction of being able to help someone. I think there was a point in time where I was part of a research team of with other like PhD students to map out the markets of various industries for small companies to bring in alternative solutions. So like one of them was this like alternative form of leather called gelatex, if I remember correctly. And then they wanted us to research the entirety of the markets in like different regions. And I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. So we did it together. And then we had this like really big paper, this giant PDF, and we sent it to them. And then it felt really good to know that this company that is working on a solution that is very sustainable for the planet is using our research to do that. So the fact that they're reaching out to this and they say like, oh, thank you so much, this is amazing. I'm like, oh, that felt really good. It's the same with Roam FM. It's the same with every other, podcast that I do. Got some emails from people who I have never talked to ever. But the fact that they went out their way to email me and say, hey, I'm this person from this state in the US. I don't know anything about Rome until I found it, and then I had so much fun learning it. And then all of a sudden I found your show, and now I recommend it to all my friends. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah, this is great. I wouldn't even have to eat. I could fast on food. I could survive on compliments and impact, on visible impact. So knowing that, I think I've been trying my best to design my attention to help those who showcase visible impact, or actually be as close to the people that I can help with as much as possible. That's one. But maybe that thinking has a flaw in that I may have compromised myself too much, right? Like that in order for me to see the visible impact, I have stopped working out so that I can pay attention on my laptop or whatever it is. Maybe that's it. Like maybe that's why, right? Like maybe I need to see the impact on myself first before I can see the impact on anyone else. Because I can feel my muscles working when I'm doing push-ups or whatever. But no one else is going to know that. So I'm like, okay, then I don't really need to know it, right? Like my checklist for recording an episode doesn't include doing 50 push-ups, which honestly, it should. Like, honestly, it should, for, there we go. Some podcasting tips for anyone out there. Work out before you do any public speaking event so that you can get that tension up, that positive tension, or releasing some of the energy. Maybe that's why.
Hey, it's one of the main things I learned from the performative speaking cohort On Deck is to prepare for a conversation, a talk, or something like that. It's like what emotion do you want to express? And then if you want to have high energy, it's like you listen to music, you do push-ups. Like before this conversation, I was listening to Rage Against the Machines. It's to increase my energy. So anyhow, Norm, I guess the clear thing I see here is like, how do you connect sleep, exercise, and nutrition to your main motivator, which is to make an impact to people? Now, I guess that's the design.
Yeah, it's a balance, and I feel like I've read up a lot of articles, a lot of books, written about it. I mean, I didn't publish anything, but like written about it for myself, and I've forgotten most about it. But if I were to explore it again on sleep, exercise, nutrition, the number one thing that would help and to connect with the rest of it is, one, to remind myself that the body is the vessel for the mind, and the mind is the driver for the body, right? So the first thing that I should do in the morning, to be honest, should be to work out. It's worked before. Like I mean, back in uni, I would have like early morning workouts, and that actually set the mood for the rest of the day. So the first thing that I would do in the morning at that time, if I were to do something that would set the mood for the rest of the day, that is the mood for the rest of the day. That's how I can ensure a minimum viable X equals +1 on my graph, by working out early in the morning. So if I could do my exercises, or the majority of it at least in the morning, that can actually release all that pent up stored energy, release all that pent up tension, so that I can label it as positive or negative. Because if I don't use any of it, it becomes negative over time. It becomes a weight that I just cannot hold, right? That's one. Nutrition. Well, I've just been fasting until 2 p.m., to be honest. Every morning starts off with just a coffee. I just don't eat breakfast that much anymore. That does affect my energy, sure. But it also is perfectly fine with me. Like, I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually okay with eating 2 meals a day. And they're not even that big. When I was really obsessed with like getting muscle or protein shakes and all that, sure, that makes sense. But I'm not really in a position to chase after that now, and I would feel more leaner. Figure is actually okay. So nutrition on that. I used to do this thing from this website called Muscle Hack, where he would talk about a model where you just count your carbohydrates. So instead of counting your macros or whatever it is, I just memorized the numbers of servings of different carbohydrates, and then I just make my maximum 100 grams. So I can eat any number of carbs, but if I reach 100, I just stop for the day. And then, that means like, a bowl of rice is 20, a plate of rice is 40, a pasta plate is like 50, 60, bread, toast, like one slice of toast is around 17, 20, or like if it's a different kind of toast, it's like 14, 16, sure. And I just count that out. It doesn't even have to be accurate, right? It's just principles. So I just count that much. I'm like, okay, if it doesn't reach 100, okay, I just stop there. And then cheat day on Saturday. Although I even stopped the cheat day thing because I'm not really gaining anything, so that's okay. So that's kept my, body fats, my energy generally in check. Although I noticed that when I had a very vegetarian diet, maybe 3 months ago, that's upped my energy by a ton. So massive intake of protein from meats, or not even the protein part, just meats in general, has led me to a very sluggish state. So I was thinking like, oh, maybe I should just be a little bit more vegetarian. I mean, I love my meat. Like, no one's going to take me away from fried chicken, but I had to take that into moderation so that I can get more energy throughout the day. So that's probably one. Sleep is still a big one. Sleep is something that I'm still working on. And the reason to this is my schedule is being very, very different. It's not only the, mad scientist muse capturing me at any time of the day or night. It's also the fact that because of my nature, the nature of my job, I have calls with people in a different time zone. So I do have to stay up until 1 a.m. just to do work, right? I'm in work mode when I'm sleeping, like when I'm supposedly asleep. So my circadian rhythm is like pretty off. Ideally, if I want to keep this up, where my sleep would compel me to want to wake up around 5 a.m., 6 a.m. so that I can start doing workouts, then I have to worry about how to change each day so that it caters for work at night. And I haven't really fleshed this out in my Roam graph because obviously it's a Roam graph. But I was trying to assign days in the week to night work shifts and day shifts so that it can help with calls, interviews at night, but then it can also help with maintaining that rhythm so that I can expect these things to happen. So the days where I work during the day, I don't have any calls at night, that would be a day shift. And then I can sleep earlier so that I can wake up at 5 a.m. to do a workout. That's one example. But then a night shift is when I have to call someone at night. I cannot help but I have to stay up, right? So it's going to be very hard for me to wake up at 5 a.m. because I don't want to betray myself via fatigue. Although I can wake myself up with a couple of push-ups, I'm sure. But is that sustainable is another story. So yeah, I mean, those are the intersections for all those three elements I'm exploring. And but one more, probably another element is context. How do I change context to give myself a chance to engage more of my senses while still doing the same amount of work? Say that I'm always at this space, I'm always at this room, and I'm always working like this. That's great for a lot of people who have this one space, and then this is the context in which you work, nothing more. I don't stay still. So I don't like sitting down too much. I mean, I do capoeira. Like we stand and we're on our hands a lot, right? Like you can't help it, right? I gotta move and I dance as well, right? We gotta have shoes on. We gotta dance. We gotta see how we pose in front of the mirror. We gotta see how these specific moves work. So I need variety in my space. So I need stations around the house to allow me to work, yet still change my posture, change my what I'm taking in from around me. Luckily, this is it's a laptop, so it works really well. So I could just take this away and I could just work somewhere else in the house. So sleep according to 2 types of schedules. Nutrition, which is, counting your carbs, implementing ceilings for that, and fasting. And then what was the other one? Exercise. I think. And exercise, I still need to work on that. Like, I mean, we've already talked about just now. And environment. So variety in environment.
Cool, man. Would it help if what you call this, if I expect you to give updates on this at some point? I mean, I'm also interested, like, to see whether this thing actually works, because it worked for me, and I'm about to talk about it as well in the book. So I want to see whether this works for other people as well, to overcome burnout by simply taking care of not only meaning, but also physical well-being.
To minimize the chances of me giving up on this, not that I'm trying to answer the question, accountability will be a very big one. So here's the thing. I trust everything that we say here. There's no denying that. Acting upon it, right? Thinking and execution are two different things completely, right? You need to have both. In order for humanity to accelerate or progress, you need both. You need thought, you need action. So execution is one other thing, right? Execution is where I falter here, right? Hesitation, whatever it is. If I have some level of accountability, that would be great, because I can write about this, I can talk about this, I can write videos about this, or whatever it is, and have this video out. Like, this video will probably be a form of accountability, right? Like, I don't want to betray myself. I'm a very selfish, greedy guy. I want to make sure that I do not lie to myself. I do not betray myself. I do not hinder my ability to seek freedom, seek independence, seek sovereignty, of most of all, by lying to my words right now. So, like, if we had this level of accountability out there, that'd be great. I'm pretty sure that even if it's not me, the public may be linking this video to me and be like, hey, what you're saying here right now, you're saying it is completely against what you said in like minute 49:51, where you said you promised to do the following. I'm like, oh shit, now I have to worry about that now. And I think that way the best way to do it. It's not that I will depend on public accountability, but it is definitely a major influence. Of course, I'll be planning it out before I start it, but you want to start shooting before you aim in this case, to minimize hesitation, right? You can't really, if paralysis analysis starts happening, then I've already failed before I began. If I start now, like even just small steps, right? Like what you say, just do it, right? Just do 20 push-ups right now. Then that's progress already, right? A log of that, right? A level 1 model of that happening is, 20 push-ups every day. Level 2, more structure. Level 3, sleep patterns, schedules, etc. Level 4, updating changes or like changes in the environment, etc. Maybe the next level is purchasing certain things or reading certain books. But then it's supposed to all feed back towards progress or output. Yeah. If this video is out there, oh God, the world has me by the neck. So I will definitely be doing this.
Cool. I'll also be reminding you, man, in Twitter, perhaps. I'll put it in my own graph, tag some dates there so that I can see it, and link references to the day itself. So anyhow, that's a lot of external expectations to help you with the journey. So
Damn. Oh.
so I think this is a good time, a good place to close up this conversation. Um, I hope we could continue having some more in the future. We'll see what the progress. Anything else, Norm, that you think we should be talking about before we end?
I mean, I've said most of what I want to say, mainly because the multifaceted approach to everything adds so much color to one's life. In a society where specialization is much more rewarded than generalization, which already in itself has a very negative connotation, because what's better than specialization is specialization in multiple things at the same time, hence the obsession over everything, right? I wanted to push that, like polymathy, the research field of polymathy. And yes, it is an academic field, which is 10 out of 10 great sources for figuring out how to think more things better, knowledge integration, etc. I wanted to push for generalization to be the norm for a lot of things, not just blanket surface level primers on the fields of interest. There's nothing wrong with that, but more so the extra effort in obsessing over these fields, which already sounds kind of crazy because obsession already has a negative connotation, but can help it. Articulation has such a very fickle set of rules for it. I think the only thing I want to highlight is when you want to explore anything, it must be relative. It must be relative to something. It has to be relative to who you are, what you're obsessed about elsewhere. It has to be relative to your environment. And therein comes a phrase that I want to explore, but I think it's been used by some other people, so I may have to change it, but I don't know. But a phrase that I call ecosystem thinking. So it's pretty much from the lens of someone when they're exploring a field or whatever it is, to ask themselves, when exploring this thing, this blank, what is its relationship with everything else that I know? So that answer, there's no wrong answer to it. But if you have an answer, that's step one. That's the important part there. If tomorrow I be like, actually, I'll give you an example, right? Okay, I'll give you an example. So last weekend, I became obsessed with motorcycles. I don't know why. Motorcycles. So I just watched like 40 videos of motorcycles, the types of motorcycles, which ones work well on pavement, which ones work well on off-road, good brands for entry level. They all look cool. Which mods on a Honda Rebel 500? I'm like, I don't know, I'm never gonna buy one, but it just looks so freaking cool. And on adventure biking, where you just take one motorcycle and then you travel the world. So what bags to buy, and etc. I was like, why am I so obsessed with this? I'm never gonna ride a bike. It's kind of dangerous over here. There's the safety implication, whatever, but it still looks cool. So standard thinking dictates that you will default this interest, this pursuit, as a fleeting moment in your lifetime, as a form of interest. Nothing more, nothing less. It's just this one weekend, you're like, oh, motorcycles. That's it. Ecosystem thinking adds a deeper layer to that activity, that moment. What it does is that when you are exploring a field, whether it's motorcycles or what have you, yet your primary interest is something else, right? Like knowledge management or whatever it is. Ecosystem thinking is basically a few set of tips and tricks or frameworks to enable the integration of this new field with every other field in your life. Motorcycles has absolutely nothing to do with podcasting, has absolutely nothing to do with Rome, has absolutely nothing to do with knowledge management, has absolutely nothing to do with fiction, right? Nothing. Okay. But the implications of motorcycles, the engine, the mods, the performance, the community behind the motorcycles. Like people are, they obsess over cruisers, over standards, or over sport bikes and Kawasaki Ninjas, right? That can be seen in the knowledge management community, right? People obsess over specific tools. They obsess over Rome Research Rome 42, but then, some people obsess over only vanilla Rome. We're seeing subsets of groups there. So there are overlaps, right? So when you look at the commonalities between these motorcycle communities and the knowledge management communities, all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're saying the same thing. They're just using the jargon of their respective contexts. So you're just switching contexts, but it's the same instincts. It's the same human behaviors. It's the same animalistic tendencies. It's just desire to fit in. It's the desire to gain an identity. It's just the desire to do whatever it is. So it doesn't, motorcycles don't have to make that connection. But if each integration of a field adds to your ecosystem of your mind, then that new field has a percentage chance of giving you a muse. And we're back to muse again, right? We're 2 hours, whatever, into this call. And I'm trying my best here to transclude everything that we're talking about in the past 1 hour, 1.5 to now. From perspective of ecosystem thinking, our conversation is an ecosystem of 20 to 30 different directions. And if you have the transcript to this call, someone is going to look at the transcript and be like, oh my God, we talked about 50 different things at the same time. For a lot of people, they'll just get lost. They'll be like, why can't you just stick to one topic? I'm not here to satisfy those people. You and I are very different already, right? We are mad scientists. We have the mental agility to jump from field to field without losing ourselves. Mental agility is another phrase that I used in my graph to describe that. When you're talking to someone and then you're like, oh, this person has great agility. If I, come to you about exercising, about lifting weights, to knowledge management, to project management, to Rome, to biotech, to cure for coronavirus, I trust you, Khalil. I trust you that you're able to handle that. If we are able to go through all those topics, I trust you to have the mental agility to jump from each field, and you will never get lost because that is how your mind works. So when we consider our own agility for all these kinds of things, you should be agile enough to take any interesting field and apply it to every other field that you are fascinated by. What color is it? What shape is this field, right? Motorcycles, obviously the shape of a motorcycle, duh. But for something more intangible, like knowledge management, what is the shape of your knowledge graph? All these crazy questions coming out. These questions lead to answers, leads to muses, and then all of a sudden it's a feedback loop. So with that being said, if you harbor or if you engage in ecosystem thinking, it's always that question. How can I integrate or connect this new field into all my other fields? Because part of polymathy is that you are the culmination of all the overlaps of all of your fields that you're interested in. You are inherently polymathic because you overlap everything. How you overlap it, why you overlap it, where you overlap it, when and how you overlap all these things. Guess what? When you add all that together, that's who you are. Boom, learning identity. Your learning identity is polymathic. Everyone is inherently polymathic. And that is why, right in the beginning of this call, I hated it when people are like, oh, I'm a polymath. Oh, no, screw you. No, we're not here to, it's not cheap. No, you earn that overlap. You obsess over that overlap. If you default to calling yourself one, no. Real polymaths do not call themselves polymaths. They are polymathic. It's a state. It's tension that is used in every single field they're interested in. And one of those pillars is ecosystem thinking. So yeah, hopefully that was a semi rant. I'm really sorry, but I really wanted everyone to. I just want everyone to think in ecosystems, not in singular fields. That's all.
Yeah, and it's a great way to close this conversation. So we have a lot of fields we're talking about, and now we're intersecting all of them. And I guess for the listener, the viewer, I guess you will have to add this to your own graph, to your own intersections, and to build your own ecosystem of ideas. So, Norm, thank you so much for this conversation, and I'll see you around.
All right, thanks, man.
All right.